Oceaneering is one of a kind. It made some really smart acquisitions along the way, and it is still Oceaneering today. And I think it's the women and the men that go offshore that make Oceaneering what it is today. And they are the most important part of the entire process. And we sometimes lose track of that sitting back in our offices.
Hey, I'm Bill Mallon, Vice President of Global Marketing Communications with Oceaneering, and today I'm in San Francisco to go visit Dick Frisbie, who worked for Oceaneering for decades. And so as part of the 60-year celebration, our anniversary, if you will, we're going to go talk to Dick and find out a little bit about the past and how we got to where we are at Oceaneering. Dick Frisbie, you have worked for you worked for Oceaneering, had an illustrious career, but you know what? Let me let you tell everybody who you are, what you did for Oceaneering, how long you were there, etc.
I worked for Oceaneering for 40 years and was Senior Vice President of Deepwater Technology.
And let's hear where you went to school. And you have I'm going to cheat. I'm going to look at my iPad every now and then. Mechanical engineering degree and physical oceanography. From the, actually stored in your chair. For where?
Virginia Polytechnic or Virginia Tech.
I'm just curious, this is a me question. Physical oceanography, what's that?
It is where you have chemical, biological, geological, and physical. And physical is like currents, waves, things like that. The dynamics of the ocean as opposed to animals, and which is the biological.
And somehow you ended up working with ROVs at Oceaneering. How did that happen?
So when I got my degree in physical oceanography, a company called Ocean Systems hired me. And I was a diving systems engineer, designed and built it. So one day I was sitting in my office and the president, Jerry Jones, came in and he said, "What do you know about ROVs?" And I said, "I've never dated it." And he looked at me and said, "Dick, I asked you a serious question." I said, "I have seen a little bit about them, but I don't know anything." He said, "Well, I've just taken an option of 5 of them from a company called Amatex Straza out in El Cajon, and I have 90 days to cancel the option." And I said, "Jerry, where in the hell is El Cajon?" And he says, "California." And that was the beginning of it. So Scorpio was the first commercial work-class ROV ever built. And we took it to a job in Taiwan, total fiasco, but that's a great story, but a separate story. And so, but what I realized then is there's something here that I think can work. And as drilling was going deeper, there was clearly going to come a time when diving could not meet the requirements of what was required. And the problem was that Oceaneering and Comex were such dramatically powerful companies. They had the technology, they had people, they had the infrastructure, they were worldwide. Ocean Systems was kind of a minnow in that field. But when I looked at ROVs, I said, this is something that can level a playing field because no one has ROVs. So the first company that gets good at it will do it. So we built ROVs, and then in 1984, Oceaneering bought what was then sold to Ocean Systems, and sort of I and the ROVs and Kevin McAvoy and Norb Gordon, and we all came along because we were working for Ocean Systems at the time.
You did an interview, 2009, University of Houston, where basically, I think you said something to the effect of there was no ROV training or anything. Like, is that correct?
That is correct. There were a couple of, the Navy had one, AT&T had one, and the little RCV 225 was just at the beginning of, it hadn't come on the market yet. So there was no ROV industry. There is no commercial ROVs at the time.
Simple question. How'd you figure it out?
Went out to El Cajon, as I called the place, and spent 6 months out there. Saw the family 2 or 3 times, and it was just chaotic, Bill. They didn't know that they were a big defense contractor, but they knew nothing about the offshore. So there was this arrogant government contractor meets dumb diving engineer kind of conflict there. And so we just worked our way through it. And I had to hire people, had no idea really what I was hiring, who I was hiring. But, if you go read the beginning of the aircraft industry, it kind of was the same way. You just, whatever you got wrong one day, you tried to fix the next day.
You're a mechanical engineer. I'm a civil engineer, but an engineer nonetheless. I want to talk about the Hydra ROV because wasn't that I think conductors and fiber, you tell the story. Well, how did that come to be?
Well, after we got Scorpio, we gave up on Amatec. They're just too difficult dealing with that government contract. We went up to Vancouver to a company called International Submarine Engineering, and they had something called a TROV, which are tethered remote operated vehicle. Huge, really mainly for like pipeline inspection. And we took a couple of those, but I looked out there. I used to always go to the conferences, and I sort of got more interested in the ADC, the Association of Drilling Contractors, because that's where I saw the opportunity in ROVs, not so much in pipeline inspection, but if you get on a drill rig, you can be on a drill rig for 15 or 20 years. And they were going deeper. They're going to 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet. And so all the world-class ROVs at the time were just not good at drilling support. And so I went up to Canada and sat down with them and said, I need something that's a cage-deployed, small, powerful, 2 manipulators that will fit on a drill rig. Because just getting spaced on a drill rig is pretty hard. Pretty big negotiation. And so we jointly designed what became the Hydra ROV. And it probably was the single most successful ROV because it really leapfrogged into the drilling business and changed the entire drilling field from using no support or cameras on guide wires to using ROVs exclusively.
So you say the Scorpio is a separate story. I don't think I'm going to let you get away with that. You got to tell that story. What's that story?
So at Amatec Straza, this Chinese guy who was from Taiwan had come, and Amatec was who you have to talk to Ocean Systems because they had the ROV. So this guy called Telomar comes in. He says, we want to collect coral, red coral from the deep ocean. Because if you ever go to China, Singapore, you'll see all carvings of everything in red coral. And it's incredibly valuable. A fan about that big raw from the ocean bottom is worth like $50,000.
Oh, wow.
And so but the only way they could get them in deep water is to drag the nets. And of course that broke them up. So he decided if we could get an ROV, go down there, grab it with a manipulator and bring it up. But that sounded like a good idea. The first thing I did, I said, I think that's a good idea, but you need to pay us $100,000 mode fee before we do a thing. Because I didn't know what we were getting into. So the system went to China.
And real quick, people watching may not necessarily know what MOB is.
Mobilize the system to Taiwan.
We'll get it there.
To get it. And we gave them the specs for basically a workboat because no DSVs didn't exist. And this was 1978.
And Sam, I ask you again, what's a DSV?
DSV is diving support vessel. And they're ubiquitous in our industry right now. So Chuck Collins, who was my superintendent, he phones me about 3:00 in the morning, which is when most of my phone calls came in, which my wife really appreciated. And that went on for 40 years, actually. So
still married?
Still married. Okay. And 2 great daughters to go along with it. But he said, this is a fiasco. Get your butt over here right now. So next morning I was on a plane to Taiwan, got there, went down there, and what we were on was a Taiwanese fishing boat.
That's a lot like a DSB.
Yeah, it's not like. It is small, cramped, single engine.
Barely running.
No one spoke English, barely running. 6 of us lived in a cabin, single cabin. A cabin a quarter the size of the room we're in right now. So
that's no good in there.
Terrible. And food was terrible. Sailed out dove to 3,000 feet, which was amazing, and actually saw the coral. But this ship couldn't stay in one position. And so we really saw the coral as we were being dragged across the seabed. So he said, okay, we got to go back in and we got to get an anchor for this, and 3,000 feet of water. So we went back in, and about midnight they said, okay, we're going to load it on the boat, we'll go. So we went down, and where they had anchored up was at an old fish market. And there was just fish and oil and that all over the bottom, and this big reel of anchor wire comes up, and it's on the back of a big three-wheeler industrial tricycle pedaled by this guy. And they start to unload it, and it gets loose, and it's rolling across this dock, and there are people chasing it. These Chinese guys are chasing it, and I'm just saying, this is not going to turn out well. So it actually ended up rolling in the harbor, and that was it for the night. So they hired a diver. The diver shows up the next day. Well, this diver came in there, took off his clothes. He was in his underwear, took a hose from a little generator that was blowing air, jumped over the side, and hooked it up. We went out again, never got a lick of coral thing. Came back in, said, we can't do this. Next morning, went back to the dock, and the Scorpio was gone. The boat was gone. It had been stolen. It had been pirated. So that is the only ROV that has ever insurance on a piracy claim in the history of the business.
How could you not want to tell that story? That's a great story.
Lloyd's of London probably does not want to hear that story. I think the statute of limitations may be gone by here. So might be all right.
It was just a total fiasco. And so I came back and told her sort of wife, she said, you sure you want to do this for a living? I said, yeah, I think I do, which turned out okay.
Training, you said that you didn't have a whole lot of training. You guys figured it out, but somehow Oceaneering has become I guess the trainer of choice. I mean, we have some of the greatest training there is. How did we go from nothing to where we are now?
I think it was just sort of an evolutionary process. There was, I never had a grand scheme. I had some basic philosophical criteria. And one of them, I decided we were going to be the best at ROVs in the world. That was just going to be that was going to be our mark. We didn't have to be the biggest, but we had to be the best. Turns out we became the biggest, but probably because we were the best.
You know what's interesting is I have that very question here where I'm going to ask you that question in just a second. So,
okay.
Yeah, Tim. So don't get ahead of me because, and you haven't even seen the notes. You're just kind of, yeah. But go ahead, yeah.
So the training in the beginning, we found out a couple things when we hired people. You would look at a resume and you see all these electronics backgrounds and stuff like that. You say, wow. So you might hire the person. You found out that pure technical skills was only a part of a good ROV technician, supervisor, superintendent, manager. And it took us a while to figure out. First of all, we found out that people came out of the Navy and actually out of submarine acoustics had all the skills and more than we ever needed. And also, they were used to being away from home, from being away from their wife, their girlfriends, their families. We also then found out that anyone that worked on a helicopter was pretty good because usually when helicopters break, there's a lot of stress to get it working quickly and safely on it. And so we hired them, and they would go on their job and come back and say, hey, we didn't know anything about that. So we would add that to the training. Finally, we set up a formal training school down in Morgan City. And we never had that before. I mean, that was probably 1990 before we really did that. We had a great syllabus, but the people teaching it were our operating people. So if someone called in from the shore with a problem, the course stopped while they went to solve the problem. So we said, wait a minute, we need some professional instructors and stuff like that. So it evolved, and companies have tried to copy us, but I think we have by far the strongest training program.
Okay, then perfect transition to the question you tried to answer before I asked it. Our goal, your goal, you wanted us to be the best, not necessarily the largest, but somehow, not only are we the best, we're the largest. How did that happen?
So I went to a course at Rice called Leading High Performance Team, a 3-day course, and it was just a great course. A guy called Brent Smith taught it. And I went back and sent a couple of other people to it. John Kreider, we sent to it. And then I asked what they think of it. And they thought this was trivia. It was about developing people to be leaders and that. So I went to Collins and Huff. She's always hard sell. And I said, we need to hire Rice to develop us this program that we can teach to ourselves and go around the world and teach this to 1,000 people. And John said no. And Jay said, let's talk about it. Because John always went for the cost side of the equation. But John always came down with the right decision. So I kept campaigning. And because the ROVs were so successful, I was probably allowed to get away with more than most. I mean, and John and I, we had a very combative but highly respectful. I mean, he taught me to be a business manager. No one had ever taught me that. So we finally paid Rice, as my recollection is, $250,000. And they first of all, Rice said no. We don't do that. We don't write courses.
You had to sell it to John and sell it to Rice.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we had Jay to help sell it.
Right.
So they set up a course, and then we brought in 50 people from around the world. Because they said, well, we'll teach the course. I said, no, Oceaneering has to teach the course to its people. So its people believe that we believe that's the most important thing we do. And outside people teaching it. But some courses you got to do that way for, skill sets of knowledge, and just fine. But if you really want to affect the change, if they hear it coming from their managers and their co-workers, it's much more credible than it comes from anyone. And you can say, oh, by the way, we into that job, we did that, and this is why we want to do that. But they can relate to that. But an outsider just doesn't have that database to tie coursework to operational jobs that happen offshore, good and bad. So we did, and I think we taught over 1,200 people over the years. I also decided that we had to take our senior managers, like ROV managers, and that, not senior manager, and send them to Harvard for the executive management course. Jay and I had a lot of said, well, why do you want to do that? I said, well, they'll learn a lot, but also I want them to come back knowing that they're every bit as smart and capable as all those people at Harvard that have all these advanced degrees. And I said, that is powerful for them to just have the self-confidence that we can compete with anybody. So I think they sent about 18 people to Harvard over about a 4-year period.
I want to ask you a question about space systems. We've got folks like you, folks like Kevin, folks like Nord, obviously folks like Mike. Somehow, God knows how, we ended up working for NASA. We ended up working on space systems. How in the hell did that happen?
I had Mike Gernhardt, who worked for me for many years, then went on to be an astronaut, and now is working for Jeff Bezos on his lunar program. Mike is just the smartest. And Mike started as a dive. First of all, he's got a degree in physics in Vanderbilt and a PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. So, smart guy. He and I wanted to start Oceaneering Space. We saw that we could help them in certain areas, like EVA, and that is diving. And tooling is tooling. They got electric and highly sophisticated in that, but it's still tooling. And so we went down there, and we were incredibly naive. I mean, we thought NASA would really buy into this story.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And w- they didn't quite applaud us as quickly as we expected. No. But we also ran into a guy called Dick Johnston, and he had been Mercury project manager for a while, and he had retired. And actually, Tom Hicks, who was the CFO before Maura McGurr, had met Richard at some conference about, and he came and said, "Dick, I think you should talk to this guy." And so Richard Johnson's came on board part-time, sort of as a consultant. And Richard could get you into anyone in NASA. I mean, most of the senior management at NASA had worked for Richard Johnson when he's ran the Project Mercury program. And so we had just instant credibility, way beyond. We may never have got to where we are today without that one contact. So you don't want to get carried away about how smart you are. Along the way, a lot of good things need to happen. And then you need to take advantage of them when you get the opportunity. And we did that. So 2 GE arms, what formed NASA's first, what we would call manipulator lab, which had the manipulators doing, tasks. And they used it to get sort of, can we see it with this camera if we're approaching subjects in space? And that's
Exactly what we do underwater.
That's exactly what we do underwater. And all of the tools now dock with something that is a direct grandchild of the Oceaneering bucket, and that. So there are analogies, but we needed the entree. Once we got it, we did really well. And then we bought a company called ILC Dover, which did the heat shields and heat blankets. That made us much bigger in the business. Sort of gave us the credibility of size and that. So it was really just someone has an idea, and then can you turn it into something real? And there are some of my ideas I'd rather not discuss.
You just said something that I thought about, deck space. Having an ROV deck space, I mean, that's expensive real estate up there. So and the reason I'm asking is because we went from divers, we went to ROVs, we need to take up deck space, but now we're looking at stuff like remote piloting from far away. I mean, I guess it's the next evolutionary step, but these guys at the OROC, the Onshore Road Operations Center in Norway or in Morganton, wherever there's several locations, Aberdeen, they fly an ROV 4,000 miles away.
Yep.
What are your thoughts on that? Did you ever see that happening? Or
We did. In fact, we started.
And I asked you that question on purpose. I asked you, I don't yard this. I was leaving you.
A lot of things you just got to sometimes sit around and say, who saw the jet engine? Someone said, is there a better way to do it? And so build a jet engine and build a 707. And someone said, let's build something really big, like the 747. And so things go in step, and when you look at them historically, they look like they're a nice smooth curve, but they're jagged and they have ups and they have downs. So the ROV business was very much the same way. And so the first step in that was looking at it, says these hydraulic vehicles are really, really inefficient. And the reason why that's a problem is you got to put all that power down an umbilical. So your single point failure on an ROV system is the umbilical. And its size becomes a problem in high currents because 7,000 feet of umbilical hanging in the water in a 2 or 3 knot current has more power on it than anything we can build that could pull it along on the seabed. Just impossible. And so we said, let's build an electric ROV. And we didn't have a clue. But I got BP to sign a contract for what became the E-Magnet. And then we spent about 9 months just flailing around, making progress, blowing them up, and created the Magnet. And then I always believed that at some point, if you could take the vessel out of the equation, that is such a huge cost. And there's a lot of projects that maybe can't afford that cost, and put an ROV on the bottom and just leave it there, which became, the resin ROV, which we originally called the Calypso back in 2008, when we sort of came up with the concept. But Norway, Eric Seistad and Egil on that, they've been down, they said, can we figure a way to pilot these from onshore? I said, sure, why not? I mean, they do satellites and probes that are, it's 10 minutes before the signal ever gets there, but they do it from Johnson Spacecraft Center and stuff like that. So it wasn't quite that easy for us, So we did it, and we started it and got something going, and then it stopped completely. And then Norway was really the driving force in that. I mean, they believed in it more than everyone else believed. So when it got really difficult and confusing, and that they kept after it.
I want to be respectful of your time and wind this down, but I want to ask you, when you first started at Oceaneering, did you ever think that it would become what it is today?
Not a clue. Not a clue. I mean, it was just remarkable. And sometimes you sort of have to pinch yourself and think. And it was wonderful being there from the beginning. I mean, it just...
You can watch it all happen.
Yeah, there's only one beginning in any given industry. And it's just, I've been really fortunate. I have the best job in the world.
If you could look back over I want you to look back over your career, and then when you first started, or when you first started at Oceaneering, if you could give yourself some advice now, back then, what advice would you give yourself?
I think that it took me too long to totally grasp the concept is that you enable, empower, and most importantly, entrust your people to just do the right thing.
I have on my shirt 60 years at Oceaneering. What is that? When you think about 60 years, what does that mean to you when you look back over Oceaneering the last 60 years? What do you think of? What does it mean to you?
Well, first off, you think of it, it is unique. It is truly unique. There is no other subsea service company that has stayed in business for 60 years. They've merged, they've been bought, they've gone out of business, and that. Oceaneering is one of a kind in that started as Oceaneering. It made some really smart acquisitions along the way, and it is still Oceaneering today. And I think that speaks volumes, again, for what? For the people of Oceaneering over the years. And that's what that 60 means.